We're going to study hopefully about 5 paragraphs, 5 pieces in the Meshech Chochma for Parshas Devarim. And we start with his first opening presentation, which is Pasuk Ches. Re'ei nasati lifneichem es ha'aretz. And at the end of this pasuk, it says, Laseis lahem ulizaram achreihem. So this is Moshe Rabbeinu's presentation of the divine promise that the children of Israel will inherit the land. Now, before we study Rabbi Simcha, let me offer 2 introductions. Introduction number 1 is that this phrase Laseis lahem appears not only here at the beginning of Sefer Devarim, but appears in Parshas Ekev in Sefer Devarim another 2 times. And this you'll find in Perek Yud Aleph of Sefer Devarim, and you'll see it twice, Laseis lahem. Once in Pasuk Tes, Laseis lahem, and another time in Pasuk Chaf Aleph, Laseis lahem. And this leads me to the first introduction, that the magic number for our purpose is 3. The Torah repeats itself, Laseis lachem, 3 times. Second introduction is that Rabbi Simcha is a halachist. And what his ideal goal would be is to find in the number 3, Laseis lahem, the 3 times God gives the land to Israel, 3 grifts, 3 nesinos, a halachic significance to those 3 nesinos. And he bases himself on the Sifri. And according to the presentation of Rabbi Simcha, the Sifri offers 2 approaches. So we're looking for 2 different approaches to understand 3 nesinos. Laseis lachem, thrice. The first approach of the Sifri is that Laseis lahem, number 1. Now, in our pasuk it says Laseis lahem ulezaram achreihem. So the Sifri is going to take the 3 nesinos and be malbishit on these 3, Laseis lahem, lizaram, and achreihem. So what are these 3 nesinos? The first one is Boi Haaretz. And that refers to the Jewish people at the culmination of 40 years in the Midbar. And they crossed the Jordan and they conquered the land. So that's under the tutelage of Yoshua. Ulizaram Eila B'neihem. Not sure exactly what the Sifri has in mind. Achreihem is Eila as a reference to lands, Shekovshu David v'Yeravam. So the Psukim tell us in Sefer Malachim Beis that David expanded the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, and he went north to an area called Aram Tzova, Syria, and Yeravam expanded it even further. So again, what the Sifri is looking for is to find 3 episodes in Jewish history that parallel the 3 nesinos. And 3 times the land is gifted to Klal Yisrael. One is the Olei Mitzrayim. The second is Achreiam, is he calls Zaram, the next generation. And finally, the gift of the expanded boundaries of Eretz Yisrael under the military conquest of David and Yerovam. Davar Achet. Now we get to a second approach, again in the Sifri. I didn't find it in the Sifri, I found it in the Yalkut. Anyway, what are these three gifts of the land to Israel? Historically, when did they take place? Second approach. Number one, the first gift was Bai Haaretz, again referring to the Ole Mitzrayim, the period at the end of the 40 years in the Midbar. Lizaram is Ole Bavel. So now we're talking past the exile of, at the end of the 8th centuries, that the Jews were settled in the land. And 70 years later, under the supervision of Ezra and Nehemiah, we have the Ole Bavel. They inherit the land. That's the second Nesina. And finally, Achreim is an allusion to Yemos HaMashiach. Again, just to review this, this is like an hour shir that we're going to try to fit into 15 minutes. The first approach is we have, for the number 3, we have 3 akafas. Right? The number 3, according to the first approach in the Sifri, is Ole Mitzrayim, and then the next generation Achreihem, Zaram Achreihem, and finally David and Yerovam. The second approach is Ole Mitzrayim, Ole Bavel, and Yemos HaMashiach. And Rabbi Simcha takes it upon himself to try to explain what is the Yesod HaMachlokas, Yesod HaPlugta. And he's going to build himself on 2 sugyas. One is the sugya Masechta Megillah, and the other is in Masechta Gittin. And he says the following: Pashut, he has no doubt, the pligi, that they argue about Kedusha Rishona, Kidsha L'Shaita, V'Kidsha Lasid Lava. This is the sugya in Masechta Megillah, Daf Yudam and Aleph. And Rabbi Yeshua wants to know what happens after the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. Is the land of Israel, the Temple Mount, etc., is it all still sanctified? And therefore we could bring karbanos even without a bias. The bias is destroyed. In fact, the Gemara goes on to expand it even beyond that we could eat kadshe kachim, even though the walls of the Beis Hamikdash are destroyed. That's called Kidsha L'Shaita, the Kidsha Lasid Lava. It means that the sanctity that was engendered at the time of Yoshua is forever. Oh, says Rabbi Simcha, if that be the case, then we have a problem. Why 3 Nesinos? Rabbi Meir Simcha, as a halachist, identifies the Nesino with Kedusha. God sanctified the land. That was the gift that he granted to us. Well, we only needed one sanctification, and that sanctification would be eternal. So why 3 Nesinos? And therefore, Im Kain Ein Liachar Nesina Rishona Klum. Frekter Meir Simcha, why 3 Nesinos? There's no need for a second Nesina. So scratch out Ole Bavel, which according to the second version of the Sifri is going to be the second Nesina. That's Ole Bavel. We don't need Ole Bavel. Forget about Ezra and Nehemiah. Even despite the exile and the destruction, Eretz Yisrael is still sanctified, because we're holding now, according to that man, the Yomer Rabbi Yeshua, that Kidsha L'Shaita v'Kidsha Lasid Lava. Al Kain Darish, therefore he interprets Al Kibush Rishon. Now, what is this Kibush Rishon? I believe that Rabbi Simcha uses the phrase Kibush Rishon to refer to the entire period of time from Yoshua until the destruction of the first temple, until the exile, the first exile. Any three Nesinos would have to fit into that framework because there's no need for another Kedusha, another sanctity afterwards. Now, Rabbi Simcha has to invoke another sugya, which is a Gemara in Gittin Daf Ches, and that's a machlokes about kibush yachid. So let's take the case of David HaMelech. David HaMelech makes a decision on his own that he wants to expand the bounds of Eretz Yisrael all the way to Aram Tzova and to Syria. Does David's conquest of those extended boundaries have the halachic power to engender Kedusha? It's not included in the Kedusha of Olei Mitzrayim because this is Kibush Yachid. When Yoshua conquers the land, he does so on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael, so they can settle in the land. David HaMelech now makes his own decision to expand the boundaries for his own purposes. That's called Kibush Yachid. Does that have the power to sanctify these new areas beyond the bounds of Holy Mitzrayim? So the first approach in the Sifri, says Rameir Simcha, maintains like that Man Diomer Gittin, that Kibush Yachid Shmei Kibush, which means that Aram Tzova has the identical status of the rest of the balance of Eretz Yisrael. And what sanctifies that land? It's the Kibush of David HaMelech, and later on of Yeravam. Now, Rabosai, I'm 2/3 of the way there, at least as far as the first Lishna in the Sifri. What was the second Nesina? I don't know. I looked in the Meshech Chochma, I didn't find an answer. It seems to me that according to Sifri, when it says Lizaram Ela B'neihem, it means, and again, this has to be researched and analyzed, that there's a second level of Kedusha that is a result of what we call the normal Yerusha process. Yoshua inherits the land, and then he divvies it up, right? There's 7 years of conquest, 7 years of chiluk, and now that generation dies, and the land is passed on to the next generation. That's called Zaram or B'neihem in the language of the Sifri. I wouldn't call it a kiddush. It's not a new sanctification per se, but it's a promise that the next generation, and maybe all the generations, will inherit the land through the process of Yerusha. Inheritance law. My father dies, I inherit his property. Okay. So let's go over. We have now 3 Nesinos. We've got the first Nesina is Olei Mitzrayim. We have the next generation that inherits their parents. And then we get to David and Yeravam and Kibush Yachid Shmei Kibush. Then he says the following. Now we're up to the second Lishna in the Sifri. Koi, meaning he maintains, Vashita the Kedusha Rishona Ushnia Lokid Shalosidov. If we hold that when the bias was destroyed at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, so we now have a nullification of the Kedusha of the sanctification of Yoshua. Now we need a new gift of sanctification, and that's going to be Olei Bava. So that's Kedusha Shniya. That's the second settlement of Eretz Yisrael at the time of Ezra Nehemiah. That will sanctify the land. The first Kiddush is gone. And what is the third round, which we call the Achreihem? Eliyamos HaMashiach. which, if I understand correctly, again, Rabbi Simcha doesn't flesh this out for us, that with the second Churban at the hands of Titus and the Romans, if I hold Kedusha Rishona Kitchel Shaita Lo Kitchel Lasid Love, which means that the first Churban and the first exile undermines the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, then so too the second exile, another 8 centuries down the line, that's also going to undermine the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. So now I need a third process of Kiddush, and that's B'Yemos HaMashiach. Now, I'm a little confused here because I don't know what kind of Kiddush is going to sanctify the land at the time of Mashiach. Is it going to be settlement? Is it going to be military conquest? Is it the state of Israel? I don't know. You can think of a million different things over here. And Rabbi Simcha leaves us in the lurch. He does not explain how. I understand Ole Mitzrayim, I understand Ole Bavel. How does Kibush Melech HaMashiach, is that a military conquest? And that's going to generate a third Kiddush? I don't know. Now, why does the Lishna Basra omit the Kiddush of David and Yerucham? And Yeravam, excuse me? He says, Lishna Basra Sover Kibush Yachid Lav Shmei Kibush. Kidemoda Pligi Baba Tanoi Begitin Daf Ches. So again, since Klal Yisrael was not backing David HaMelech is making this decision on his own to conquer the lands of Syria. Therefore, one man the other says that's Kibush Yachid. And with all due respect to a Yachid, that doesn't generate a sanctity in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, David HaMelech could not be a candidate for one of the 3 Nesinos. And to sum it all up, Rabbi Simcha has a twofold machlokas in the Sifri. And one wonders if the two are Haba Hatalia, they're somehow interdependent. Both the Lishna Kama in the Sifri and the Lishna Basa in the Sifri both agree that we need to get to the magic number of 3 because the Torah repeats this Nesina 3 times over. And here's a twofold machlokas. First, they're going to argue about whether Kedusha Rishona, Kitchel Shaita, Kitchel Lasin Lavo. According to the first Lishna in the Sifri, Kitchel Shaita, Kitchel Lasin Lavo. And therefore, Ole Bavel are totally irrelevant because the Kedusha of Ole Mitzrayim is still Chai V'Kayim. It was never undermined. And that's going to lead the Lishna Kama to try to come up with another 2 Nesinos to justify the fact that the Torah gives us here in this pasuk 3 Nesinos. And the second Nesina is going to be Zaram B'nei Machreya, which is a funny kind of Nesina. I don't know exactly how that's a Nesina al Pidin. I would call it's Midin Yerusha. It's not Midin Kiddush. That has to be worked out. And then the third round, according to Lishna Kama, is the Kiddush of David and Yerucham. And here we have to introduce another machlokes, and the Lishna Kama, holds Kibush Yachid Shmei Kibush. The Lishna Basra in the Sifri holds that Kedusha Rishona Kitchel Shaita Lo Kitchel Lasid Lavo. Hence, I need the Ole Bavel in the second Kiddush to sanctify the land. So we now got 2 out of the 3. But here we're adding a piece. I don't know if Rabbi Simcha is smiling up in heaven or he's laughing at me. I don't know. That just like the first Kiddush was Batel and null and void as a result of exile, so to the second Kiddush was null and void as a result of exile. We need a third Kiddush. And that third Kiddush is B'Yemos HaMashiach. B'Mheira V'Yameinu Amen. Okay, let's go on to the second piece. I can't begin to tell you how much time I spent trying to work out this Reb Meir Simcha. If I would have written up this Reb Meir Simcha, it would be 5 pages long, and he writes it in 10 lines. But that's Reb Meir Simcha. All right. Now we get up to the Eicha pasuk. Vayomer aleichem ba'esahi lemar. And of course, the word lemar is always a red bell, for a Meir Simcha. What does the word lemar mean? Because lemar in Meir Simcha's frame of reference means one of two things. Either it means a horashah, or it means something that has to be passed on to future generations. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, I cannot carry the burden of the people. Eicha esol levadi. And my Rebbe Zichron Livracha said that Eicha appears 3 times. One's Moshe Rabbeinu, the other is Yirmiyahu Hanavi and Yeshayahu Hanavi. And each time the word Eicha is like the Megillah says Eicha of Yirmiyahu. It's an indication of terrible, devastating tragedy and catastrophe which cannot be understood. I discussed this at great length last night. The Rav has a piece in which he says that there's only one day of the year that we're allowed to ask the question Eicha, and that's Tisha B'Av, special matir for Tisha B'Av. Anyway, but Meir Simcha has a totally different approach. And Fakert, it's just the opposite. Moshe Rabbeinu is passing on a legacy of Eicha to Yirmiyahu and to Yeshayahu and Navi, and basically to all Nevi'im. Halavai, Moshe Rabbeinu says, the Nevi'im should be able to say Eicha the way I said Eicha. Halavai. And he says the following, gives a mashal. A man is blessed with great wealth and children. The man has everything. The only problem is, I call it the mosquito that's in his ear, is Yeshlo Torach Harbe. It's called, what's it called? Sar Gido Bonim. Nikos, Shvachos. Nebuch, he has to spend his money hiring nurses, wet nurses, and maidservants, make sure to clean the house. Yesterday, I was zocher to fill that role for 3 hours over here because my daughter gave birth and my son-in-law was busy moving apartments. It was crazy. Anyway, so Nebuch, this man has a tircha gedola, as Moshe Rabbeinu calls it, lo chala seis eschem levadi, eicha esol levadi, because I have so much wealth and I have to pay this one and pay that one, and I have so many children, Baruch Hashem. He says, Az Yomar, a person in this mashal turns to the Ribono Shalom with a prayer. Ma godla alaya torach michem, God, you've imposed upon me such nebuch burdens. Yitachen Hashem. Now, in my humble opinion, there's a printing error. If anybody can find this in the original, I'll be very, very excited. It should say Yitein Hashem, not Yitachen Hashem. Because I think what Reb Meir Simcha is formulating a prayer. Yitein Hashem, halavai. Yichein yelachem. Mibnechem ubnei bnechem tirchos kaelu. My children, my grandchildren, all my descendants should have these tsaras. This is what we call tsaras of a rich person, right? V'torad kazeh lo yufsak michem. You should never have a termination of this kind of a Torah. Never. You have so many children and shvachos and meinikos. And Cain, Moshe, Roa, Neman, Omar, Moshe Rabbeinu turns to Ribono Shalom. And he says, Hashem, Harbeschem, God, you made us multitude. Vehinchem ki chochvei hashamayim, and you are like the stars in the heaven. I believe that's in the pasuk here, if I remember correctly. He says, Vayomer aleichem, va'isa yilemar, lo uchal levadi seiseschem, Hashem alkeichem irbaeschem, hinchem ayom ki chochvei hashamayim lo Hashem alkei avosechem Yosef aleichem kachem elef pa'amim. V'yavarech eschem. Let God continue to bless you, and you'll be able to say what I said. Eicha esol levadi tarchachem, etc. So Moshe Rabbeinu has the Roa Neman. He's the reliable shepherd. His prayer to Hashem is that just as this generation is kechochvei hashamayim beribui b'malel nefleges al derech hanisi kein yomru roi Yisrael, all the roi Yisrael through the generations, umanigeim and livieim, all the leaders, and the prophets, Tamid Aleichem, should always be able to say about you, V'yislonenu tlunos kaelu, let halavai that they should complain these kind of complaints. V'zeu shamar, now I understand, says Rabbi Simcha, V'omar Aleichem V'yisahi Lamar. Lamar means pass it down through the generations. Shekain Yomru Tamid Aleichem, that the leaders and the prophets and the shepherds of Israel will always say about you, oh, what a tircha, so many children to keep an eye after, so much wealth, and Baruch Hashem, these are the tirdos. Halavai, we should have these tirdos. You know, on a moral, emotional level, you could say about this Rabbi Simcha, that sometimes you hear a kvetch, you know, you hear a sigh of someone who never, you know, he's got such tzaras, right? He has to make sure that his children are taken care of. You know, he has to hire lawyers and buy real estate for each one of his children. You know, never chazat tzaras. That's what the eicha is. The exact opposite of my Rebbe's approach. My Rebbe's approach to eicha was, this is tragedy of all tragedies. And he goes on to have a whole explanation. I spent an hour on this last night. What was the great tragedy of Moshe Rabbeinu's life as a leader? And Rabbi Simcha doesn't know of such a thing. How could Moshe Rabbeinu, who represents the greatest lover of Israel of all times, who's willing to give up his life for Klal Yisrael, how could he complain about Torchachem and Ribchem? Nay. He's not complaining at all. He's hoping that the Roy Yisrael Yeshayo and Yirmiyahu v'Chayotze b'Elu will always come with the same complaint. How can I carry this burden myself? Because of the bracha, the great bracha of Klal Yisrael. Okay, at this point, Rabbosai, we will fast forward to Pasuk Mem Dalet in the same Perek Aleph. Now, this pasuk, in the way Rabbi Simcha interprets it, I believe, again, this is my own take on this, will, in a sense, if you could say this, shed a light on the Holocaust. Rabbi Simcha died before the Holocaust. Let's read the pasuk inside and try to see what bothers the mind of Rabbi Simcha. So we're in Pasuk Mem Dalet. And it says the following. Vayetze ha'amori hayoshe barahu l'kraschem vayidefu eschem kasher tasena advarim vayaksu eschem b'seir ad charb. So this is the attack of the Amorites against the people of Israel. Vayaksu etchem, and they beat you down. Now, Rabbi Simcha is bothered by the following. Elsewhere, the Torah speaks about Amalek. Let's take, for example, Bamidbar Yud Gimel Chavtes. And there it says the following: Amalek Yoshev B'Eretz HaNegev, and Amalek is in the south. Okay? I'm just trying to flip the pages here in the Chumash. And here in our pasuk in Devarim, it speaks about the Amori. So Meir Simcha says the following: Lo zochar kan hamaleki. In Moshe Rabbeinu's presentation, here, he doesn't mention Amalek. Now it's interesting because in the pasuk it says Vayetze Hamori Hayoshev Bahar, and elsewhere, if you take a look in Bamidbar Yudalid, it says the following. I'm trying to juggle all these psukim, so you'll bear with me. It says, one second. It says at the end of Perek Yudalid, Vayered Hamaleki Hayoshev Bahar. Again, trying to juggle these pages here. Here it says Hayoshev Bahar. So at the end of Perek Yudalid in Parshas Shlach, describing Amalek, it says Vayered, etc. Hayoshev Bahar. And again it says Vayaksum ad hacharma. So it's very interesting. There's almost an identical mirror image between two psukim, one here in Devarim, one back in Parshas Shlach in Bamidbar, in which the Torah uses almost the same language. He describes this adversary as Yoshe Bahar and Vayaksum ad hacharma. However, in our pasuk it says Vayetze Hamori, and back in Parshas Shlach it says Vayered Hamaleki. So Rabbi Simcha wants to know what's the difference between these two nations, the Amori, which represents the 7 nations, and the Amaleki. And he says the following, that here in Sefer Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu deliberately omits mention of Amalek. Mishum sheratza lomar lahem, shelo yefachadu ka'es mipnei shahargu shnei malachi Amori b'charet. He says the following: the Jews, before they crossed the Jordan, have just defeated 2 great kings of the Amorites. And there's no doubt that the nations that occupy Palestine are going to now attack the Jewish people. And Moshe Rabbeinu wants to tell the people, don't be afraid of them. However, he doesn't want to mention the name Amalek. Even though Amaleki was part of that military campaign to attack Klal Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu felt at this moment he's got to omit mention of Amaleki. Why? Because Amaleki yifchedu mipanav. In other words, there's no way that Moshe Rabbeinu could assuage the fears of Klal Yisrael vis-a-vis Amaleki. Why? Because as the Meraglim, when they brought back that terrible description of the land, they mentioned Amalek Yoshev B'Eretz HaNegev. That's the last pasuk in Perek Yudalid in Shlach. And the reason why, no doubt, the Meraglim wanted to suck it to us. You know, they wanted to tell us that Amaleki is in the Negev. They're in the south. And that's called Ritzua Shalakuba. The Amalekim have already have a record destroying the Jewish people. And he mentions that Kishashina Ksus V'Lashon Bamos Aaron, after the death of Aaron, the nations changed their clothing to attack Israel in a way that Israel would not recognize them and identify them as Amalekim. And this is the Chazal's interpretation of a pasuk in Perkaf Aleph pasuk Beis, Im nason titem es ha'am hazeh, and Shem HaMakom Charma. So we have to look at Rashi at the beginning of chapter 21 in Sefer Bamidbar, Bamidbar Chaf Aleph Aleph, and it says there, Vayishma Knani. When did the Knanim attack the nation of Israel? Rashi says, Shama Shemes Aaron. The Knanim found out that Aaron had died, and it's Talku Anani Akavod. There was no protection for Israel. Okay, so let's just again turning pages here. I'm sorry, but you have to see it all. Rashi says, Vayishma Knani at the beginning of Perkaf Aleph in Bamidbar, Shoma Shemes Aram and Istalik Anani Akovid, and who were these people that attacked the people of Israel? Vayilachem by Yisrael, and this was Melech Arad Yoshev HaNegev. Well, who's Yoshev HaNegev? Well, Yoshev HaNegev, we saw already at the end of Perek Chaf Aleph. I'm sorry, at the end of Perek Yud Gimel, the Yoshev HaNegev was none other than Amalek. So even though it says Vayishma Knani, but it's really Amalek. Yoshev HaNegev, says Rashi, is Amalek. Shenema Amalek Yoshev Eretz HaNegev. V'shines l'shono l'daber b'loshen Knan. Yidei sheyu Yisrael mispalon l'kodesh baruch hu l'seis Knanim b'yodham v'heim einom Knanim. Ro Yisrael levusheim kelevushay Amalekim v'loshonim l'shen Knan. Amru nispal stam. Okay, there's a whole ploy here. This is a very complicated Rashi in an episode in which the Knanim tried to fool Bnei Yisrael so that Bnei Yisrael would pray to the destruction of the Knanim. But Klal Yisrael figured this out, that although these people were speaking Lashon Knanim, but it could very well be that they were Amalekim, which in fact they were. And Rashi says, V'amalek me'olam ritzua mardus liYisrael, mizuman b'chol eis l'peronios. Rashi says that Amalek is not like the other nations. The other nations of the world, that's what Rabbi Simcha wants to convey to us, will attack us, and we will be able to hold our own. But in the case of Amalek, they are ritzua shalakubo, mizuma leperonius b'choleis. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu here in Parshas Devarim, although he's really alluding to Amalek, he omits the name Amalek, because the people are about to cross the Jordan and conquer the land. This is not a good time to mention Amalek, because the Amalek are Yoshua Negev, and they're Mizuman Leperanios B'choleis. It's an amazing diuk. And he sends us this Rashi, and it really sheds a whole new light on the parsha. And unfortunately, this is the tragedy of all tragedies, that we have to realize who Amalek is. And we need divine compassion when it comes to Amalek. There are Ritzua Shalaku Bo Yisrael B'chol Eis Muchan Leperonios. Next, Pasuk Dalid, Pasuk Hey, back in Perek Aleph. Says here, second, make sure I have the right place here. I'm sorry, we're in Perek Beis, my mistake. Es ha'am tzav leimar. command the people of Israel, Lamar. Please underline the word Lamar. Atem ovrim b'gvul achechem b'nei Esav hayoshvim b'seir al tisgaru bam. Don't provoke Esav. Ki lo atein lachem l'artzam. Now, let's fast forward for a moment to Pasuk Tes. Vayomer Hashem Elai, God is now talking to Moshe. Al totzar es Moav, ve'al tizgar bam b'mulcham. Ki lo etein l'cham e'artzah. Etc., etc. So Meir Simcha is going to ask two questions. If you compare Pasuk Dalet to Pasuk Tes, or shall we say Dalet Hey to Pasuk Tes, there are two distinctions that he wants to understand. Number one, when it comes to Esav, it says Es ha'am sav le'mor. In other words, this is a prophecy given to Moshe Rabbeinu meant to be transmitted to Klal Yisrael. Sav le'mor. And the word le'mor appears. That's with regard to Esav. When you fast forward to Moab, it's Vayomer Hashem Elah. There's no le'mor. There's no tzav es b'nei. There's no tzav es ha'am. But the tzivui is almost identical in both cases. Al tisgar bam, don't provoke them into war. Kilo ete, because I'm not going to give you success. So what's the difference, asked Rabbi Simcha, between Esav and Moab? And he says the following. He says, based on a sugya in Baba Basra, Ein zaro shel Esav nimsar el b'yedei zaro shel Yosef. Moshe Rabbeinu has no special role to play when it comes to the defeat of Esav. The defeat of Esav belongs to other parts of Klal Yisrael, not to Moshe Rabbeinu, and specifically to the descendants of Yosef. So he says the following. Moshe Rabbeinu was Mizara Shaleh. He doesn't even have a shot at defeating the Bnei Esav. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't even address to Moshe Rabbeinu a tzivui al tisgar bam, but rather he addresses it to the Am. And who is the Am? It's Yosef u'Binyamin Zaro Shel Rachel. They need a tzivui not to start up with Esav. This is not the right moment to try to defeat Esav, even though eventually Bnei Esav will be Moser B'yod. Mashenke Moav are not Bnei Esav, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu is going to be tempted to initiate a battle against Moab. The next paragraph, Vayom Hashem Elai al totzes Moab. And the Gemara says about Bakama, Ma ola al daito shel Moshe. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu think that he should now fight a battle and defeat Moab? And the Gemara answers that he had a kal v'chomer. Ma mijanim shelo bo el Lazarus Moab. Mijanim were just the accomplice. They wanted to help out Moab, who wanted to destroy the people of Edom. And Amr Torah, the Torah says, destroy some mijanim v'kisam osam. Destroy the mijanim. Is Moavim atzmon lo kolshke. How much more so thought Moshe Rabbeinu he should defeat Moab, because they're the original adversaries. Oh, now, but Meir Simcha sheds another light on our question of before. When it was Sharei Umos, when it was the Bnei Esav, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu addresses a tzivui to the people of Israel with the word Lamar, that the people of Israel should not invoke the anger and antagonize the Bnei Asa, because this is not a good time to fight a battle against the Bnei Asa. Aval Khan, when Hashem addresses Moshe Rabbeinu with regard to Moab, Loksiv Lemar. In other words, the people of Israel had no thought, or shall we call it a Havamina, to invoke a battle against Moab. Moshe Rabbeinu, on the other hand, had a very logical reason, based on his Kal Vachomer, to antagonize and battle Moab. Therefore, when it comes to the Lemar, pass on to the nation that they should not invoke, or shall we say provoke, Asa. When it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu, in the case of Moab, that was a personal tzivui that was given by Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, the Gemara Bava Kama asks, Ma also daito shel Moshe. It was clear that the Gemara was looking for explanation why Hashem talks to Moshe Rabbeinu specifically and singles out Moshe Rabbeinu when he says, don't battle against Moab. And the Gemara asks, Ma also daito shel Moshe. Apparently Moshe had some sort of logic compelling to draw the conclusion that we should fight against Moab. Umesula kushas at Tosfos Bava Kama on Daf Lamed Ches wants to understand why, in the case of Adomi and Ammon, what was the logic of Moshe Rabbeinu that he thought that we should go and defeat Adomi the Ammon? The Gemara doesn't even raise that question. So Tosfos is baffled. Why didn't the Gemara raise the question in the case of Adomi? Well, the answer is, according to Rabbi Simcha, because Adomi belongs to Esav, and it wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu who wanted to initiate a battle against Esav. It was the Israelites themselves, because they believed that they wanted to antagonize Esav, because Esav, if you remember, refused to let them pass through their land, etc., etc. And they thought it was an opportune moment. The stage was set and the historical moment was right to attack the Bnei Esav. So there was no reason to ask the question, why did Moshe Rabbeinu think that we should battle against Edom? Against the Edomim, because the Edomim were Bnei Esav. Moshe Rabbeinu had no vested interest or logical, compelling argument that we should fight a battle against Esav. The people wanted to fight the battle against Esav. And that's why the pasuk says, "Sav ha'am, sav lemar," that they should not antagonize Esau. The Gemara is only bothered by Moab, because in the case of Moab, Moshe Rabbeinu gets a singular, private, exclusive tzivui not to antagonize Moab. So Gemara wants to know what was the compelling logic that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to fight a battle against Moab. Well, let's just summarize, and we'll see if we have a few more minutes to talk about the Haftorah, the various discussions that we had here in Rav Meir Simcha for Parshas Devarim. First, we had a threefold gift of the land with two Lashonos in the Sifri as to what these three gifts parallel, with an explanation of the machlokas between the two Lashonos, based on two different sugyas, one sugya of Kitcher Ichona, whether it's Kitchel Shaita, Kitchel Love or not, and the other sugya of Kibush Yachid, whether it's Shmei Kibush or not. We had another discussion about the word Eicha, where Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ba'esahi Lemar, apparently passing on a legacy for all generations about Eicha. What was that legacy? And the answer is, as we said, we should only be burdened with this kind of burden of so many children, and Baruch Hashem, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and we have so much money, and we have to hire this Meinekes and this Shivcha. That should be the Eicha Esol Avadi is Tirchach. And he blesses all the leaders throughout the generations. Number 3, we had a discussion about the difference between Amalek and all the other nations and the other adversaries of Klal Yisrael. The scariest is Amalek. And Amalek is a Ritzua that is Muchan Leperonius Bechol Ace. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu here, if you're careful about reading the Psukim, even when he's referring to Amalek, he omits mention of the name Amalek, and instead he calls them the Amorim. And number 4, we had a discussion about why it is that in the case of Esav, the Torah commands the the people, not to antagonize Esav, the descendants of Esav. And when it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem doesn't address himself to Moshe Rabbeinu. Tzavis ha'am. The answer is because Moshe Rabbeinu was a descendant of Leah and not of Rachel. And the Gemara says that with regard to battling against Esav, it's the Bnei Rachel, Yosef and Binyamin. Those Shvatim have a tremendous power to defeat, and they will defeat Esav. This particular juncture, HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands the people that they're not going to win the battle against Esav. It's premature. They have to leave that for the end of days. Moshe Rabbeinu never even had a havamina that he would be able to defeat Esav because he came from Leah and not from Rachel. And finally, the last paragraph that we had is to take a look at the difference here between Moab on the one hand and Bnei Esav on the other hand. In the case of Moab, Moshe Rabbeinu had a specific, compelling logic to fight the battle against Moab. When you were commanded to fight the battle against Midian, Sraras HaMidyanim, how much more so should we be fighting a battle against Moab? And if Hashem had to say no, Al Tizgarabam. In the case of Bnei Esav, there Moshe Rabbeinu had no logically compelling argument or kalachomer to think that now we should defeat Esav, we should fight a battle against Esav. It was only the people that had to be told and had to be instructed, Al Tizgarubam, that now we don't have the ability to destroy these nations. And the Gemara, only in the case of Moab, asks why Moshe Rabbeinu thought in his Havamina that it's time to battle against Moab. When it comes to the other nations other than Moab, the Torah says, Tzav, Al Tizgarabam, and the Torah adds the words, Lemar, Esa'am, Tzav, Lemar. Lemar means tell the people that this is premature and it's not the time to defeat Esav, Bnei Esav. Now, the last piece that I wanted to discuss with you is the Haftorah of Chazon. And you'll see this as a sort of an addendum to the commentary of the Meshech Chochma on Parshas Devarim. And he quotes the Pasuk Yeshaya, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Yud Gimel, Lo Tosifu, Have Minchas Shav, Ktoris Toeva, Hili, Lo Uchal, Oven, Ve'atzara. Now, let me just take 1 minute to open up to the Haftorah and read these psukim inside. The pasuk says, "You shall no longer bring vain meal offerings. It is a smoke of abomination to me. New moons and Sabbaths, calling convocations. I cannot bear iniquity with your assemble. Your new moons and your appointed seasons, my soul hates. They are a burden to me. I'm weary of bearing them." And the Rameir Simcha wants to know about this Ketores. It says in the pasuk that your Ketores. Now I'm not finding the pasuk, and I apologize for that. Just 1 second. It says, Lo tosifa ve mincha shov ktores to'eva. Correct? Ktores to'eva. Honestly, I don't know why. Second. Why is it that I don't find this in translation here? I can't understand it. He calls it the smoke of abomination. I think, I don't know, for some reason the English translation that I have is leaving out Ketores. So Meir Simcha says, why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Navi single out the Ketores? And he says the following. The Gemara in Krisus tells us that the Ketores was made up of 13 different herbs, and they all had a fragrant smell minus one of them, and that's called a chelbina. And chelbina, in and of itself, I don't know what it's called in English, maybe frankincense, I forget. Anyway, in and of itself, it's reicho ra. It has a bad odor. But when it's combined with the other 12, then it becomes reach tov. It gives a fragrant smell. It actually enhances the rest of the ketores. And the Gemara derives from this a conclusion that kol tainis she'ein ima miposhe Yisrael ein a tainis sharei chelbina reicho ra umana makosev im simone haktoris. So that the reicho ra of the chelbina metaphorically symbolizes the Rishoyim, the evildoers, Hoshe Yisrael. And Rabbi Simcha says that this indicates a concept called Chibur HaRasha Ima Tzadikim. Again, it's a very long piece, and we don't have time to go through it. But the Rishoyim, when they somehow connect to the Tzadikim, like the Chelbina, which is Reicha Ran, connects to the other Samamonim in the Ketores, somehow the Chelbina, the Poshe Yisrael, are enhanced. There's a Maila in the Chibur that integrates the Rishoyim when they connect with the Tzaddik. And Rabbi Simcha is going to present the thesis based on the Ran in his drashos that Klal Yisrael is one entity, is one unity, Bachdusa. And Rabbi Simcha is going to claim that the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash is the agent, the catalyst that generates the Achdus of Klal Yisrael. And therefore, as long as the Mikdash stands and we have Achdus in Klal Yisrael, then it's great for the Rishoyim to link up with the rest of the Samamonim, the Chelbina with the rest of the Samamonim, Fumisbase. And as a result, somehow even the Rasha can emit a fragrant smell. Mo'il lahotzi reach nichoach min hasamonim ha'acherim. And the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that Pizah Rishoyim no lahem v'no liolam, that the Rishoyim being spread around throughout the globe is something positive for Klal Yisrael. Now again, what the Gemara really has in mind is that if you have too many Rishoyim in one place, that's very dangerous. But if we spread them out, that's called Pizar Rishoyim, then that's great. Again, what does it mean that's great? You and I would have said it's great in the sense that it doesn't form that terrible, dangerous power of Kinus HaRishoyim. But Rabbi Simcha is going to see this in a different light. And he's going to say that Noah that it's great in the sense that the Rishonim will be uplifted through the agency of Achdus Klal Yisrael by connecting to Klal Yisrael. And he quotes a Gemara in Sanhedrin that says, Kol Bei Asara Shchinta Sharia. That whenever we have 10 Jews together, then the Shechina is Shora. And it means that when we get together a minyan, it doesn't mean that every member of that minyan is a tzaddik. But we can integrate the Rishonim into the minyan. And I'm sure all of you realize that after the Shoah, that's exactly what happened. That those Jews who wanted to pray, they desperately needed a minyan. And they weren't going to check your tzitzis to see after the Shoah if you were a believer or not. You know, whoever they found who was willing to come into the shul and be part of the minyan. And if you have you seen the video of the story that Rev Zilberstein tells about the Bava Rebbe? Yeah, so that's really this concept of including the Rishonim in a minyan, because Kol Be'asara Shchinta Sharia, that is Hashras Hashchina for 10 Jews. And he says that we have a concept called Klal Yisrael B'Achduso, and he says that the Mishkan is the Gorem that's Ma'achid Klal Yisrael, and that even those renegades, so to speak, who reject, the righteous, they reject the righteous principles of the Torah, nevertheless, they have a certain place within Klal Yisrael. And he speaks about 2 korbanos of mincha, a mincha of the Yochid and a mincha of the Rabbim. So when you have a mincha of the Rabbim, and that means that the tzibur is bringing a korban, then as long as that tzibur is one tzibur through the korban mincha, then even the Rishonim could be part of that tzibur. But if you take apart the tzibur and break it into its smaller fragments, then you basically have groups of yechid. And when you have groups of yechidim, then the influence of the Rishonim is very dangerous. So the Chelbana concept, where the Rasha could even contribute to the ultimate amalgamate fragrant smell of Klal Yisrael, that only applies when the tzibur has actus. And the agency that brings about that actus is the Mishkan or the Migdash. So today that we commemorate the destruction of the Migdash, what we're also commemorating is the breakdown of the tzibur into kvutos of yechidim. And with regard to kvutos of yechidim, instead of the Rasha having the ability to contribute as the Chelbana contributes to the other Samamonim, it's going to be just the opposite. It's a very dangerous kind of integration into Klal Yisrael. I didn't even scratch the surface here on this particular Rameir Simcha, but I always like to leave you with homework. If you get a chance to go through this Meshech Chochma on Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amotz, and it's appropriate for the Haftorah of Shabbos Parshas as Chazon, of Shabbos Chazon. Rameir Simcha in this presentation is going to talk about the failure of Tochacha. Why is it that Tochacha was a total flop? And at the end, instead of listening to the Tochacha, the situation avalanche that brought about, ultimately culminated in the destruction of the Migdash and the exile. Okay, then. So I'll take this opportunity to wish everyone a great Shabbos. If you get a chance to learn that last piece on Torah, if anybody has any questions or comments, now's a good time. And I want to wish
Shabbat shalom. Thank you.
Peace, good mitzvah. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. I have a Shalom Zacher tomorrow. Not tomorrow, tonight. I'm a day behind already. And the baby's a little yellow, so I'm waiting. Probably in the last hour, we got the results of the latest test, Billy Rubin, and see whether he could have his bris on Monday or not. So we'll figure that all out. We'll sort it all out, as they say. Okay, then. Good. Thank you so much. Lenny, I saw you called me. Lenny? Are you still there, Lenny? Oh, okay. You went already. I saw you called me before, and I wasn't sure why.